espacio de reflexión sobre la función de la cultura cinematográfica y teatral en la vida contemporánea. Voces Cátedra Ingmar Bergman.
Sticking to a dogmatic process of what film ought to be, I don't believe works. And I think in my earlier days, when I was an anthropological filmmaker, I believed quite strongly that there was one way to make a film, and this is how we had to do it. And I think some of those early films in the 70s and 80s were very effective in their time and so on. But if Werner Herzog has taught me one thing, it is that that kind of dogma, when it applies to everything, is just, it's not wrong, it's just that there is so much variety and there's so many ways of telling a story and there's so many different perspectives one can put on things, that to say there's only one way you can make this film seems to me rather, in hindsight now, rather foolish.
André Singer es un documentalista, productor y antropólogo británico. Estudió en la Universidad de Oxford, donde realizó un doctorado en la cultura de Irak y Afganistán. Comenzó a trabajar en la televisión como investigador en la década de los 70, luego como productor y finalmente como director realizando las series Disappearing World para la Televisión de Granada.
I was an anthropologist with no knowledge, wish, or link to filmmaking whatsoever in the past. And again, it's one of those happens chances that I'm sure everybody here has, that some things happen, some things don't. A newspaper advert in England was looking for anthropologists to help develop a new film series on British television. And I think I was destined to be a rather bad academic, at that particular stage in my life. And I went into film then as an advisor, first of all, and then as a researcher, and then I was trained as a director and so on. But I went into it without, which I would think probably 90% of you here have a passion for film, and that's why you've gone into film and so on. I went into it almost the opposite direction, which was I had no passion for film. I went into it as an anthropologist who suddenly saw that film could do something that hadn't really been done for anthropology before. I'd worked with Jean Rouch in France, and I'd worked with other great filmmakers, Fred Wiseman in America, and I really wanted to work with Werner Herzog, who I didn't know, but obviously admired. And I started a dialogue, but coincidentally, the week that I wanted to contact him, a British filmmaker came to me with a film that he wanted to make about the oil fires in Iraq, the Kuwait oil fire. And Werner also said he wanted to do something about that. So I was able to bring the two together, to marry them, so to speak, and persuade the English filmmaker that he'd take a step back and he'd become the cameraman instead of the director. And Werner liked him and thought that was fine. And we did Lessons of Darkness.
Something is looming over this city that will soon be laid waste by war. Now it is still alive, biding its time. Nobody has yet begun to suspect the impending doom.
And then, about a few months after that, I left the BBC. And he then contacted me to say, look, he's got another film he wants to make, which turned into Little Dieter Needs to Fly. And could I help him, because I knew the marketplace, help him and his brother, who runs his company, put it together. And we went on from there. I would say the last few years of what I've been doing, which is a mixture of producing, directing, and executive producing, have moved more and more away from traditional television production and more into whatever you want to call it, the cinema documentary, the feature documentary, the long-form documentary, films that are usually longer than an hour and have some chance in some territories of having a cinema distribution before being shown later on television. And most of these have both circuits because the cinema circuit never ever, or perhaps not to my experience, has never ever been funded outside some support from television. So the combination of cinema and television seems vital. Since I've now worked on 12 films directly with Werner Herzog and been associated with a few more, none of those would have been made without support from television. Producers don't tell Werner how to make his films. I mean, they do if they're on a suicide mission, but normally producers help Werner put his films together, raise finance, work with him, because he is clearly a director of huge stature who has earned his right to decide exactly how he's going to make his films.
I'm here with one of my favorite bears. It's Mr. Chocolate. Hey, Mr. Chocolate. He's been with me for over a decade, and he's been my good friend. Oh, he's a big bear. He's a big bear. A very big bear. Wow. Animals rule. Timothy conquered.
He tended to want to become a bear.
Most times I'm a kind warrior out here. Occasionally I am challenged, and in that case, the kind warrior must become a samurai.
I'll just tell you a little anecdote about the Wild Blue Yonder film, which shows how perhaps we don't quite understand how a film is formulated and how it's going to turn out, even when it's properly described beforehand. Wild Blue Yonder was a film that started off in Pasadena in America, where the International Space Station there asked Werner if he would make a film about the closing of their space station, which was it's about 6 or 7 years ago. They were closing permanently that International Space Station. And he lived close by, and he went in and saw them, and he loved their enthusiasm, and he was very interested in space in any case. So he said, okay, fantastic, we'll try and make a film about the closing of the International Space Station. Then he came to me, and we started the process, as always, of raising money, the worst part of our job. And even when you're working with Werner Herzog, it's not easy. You don't sort of open the door and say, everybody is knocking on the door because it's Werner Herzog. It doesn't work that way. But we did manage to persuade two major broadcasters, the BBC in London and France 2 in Paris, who both agreed that they would fund this film. So we started. Werner went off and did a little bit of filming and a little bit of research. He went to NASA and went through some of the space archives and saw the wonderful footage he could draw upon. And then, much to my annoyance, an American producer who had a lot of money and also had an archive of film about a man called Treadwell, who some of you will have heard of, went to Werner and said, look, have a look at this material. And Werner saw the material and said, oh, that's fantastic, I want to make this film. So he came back to me and said, look, I'm sorry, but I've been offered to make this film, which turned into Grizzly Man. Wonderful film, if you haven't seen it. And can we delay the film, the Wild Blue Yonder film? 6 months later, Werner came back and said, I finished Grizzly Man. It's going to be released at the end of this year. We can now go back to Wild Blue Yonder. And he said, but I've been thinking hard about this film. I'm not going to put on a German accent because it won't work. I've been thinking hard, and I've changed my mind now. I've decided, because I'm really interested in the environment and what we're doing to it, I'm going to make this a fantasy film, and it's not going to be about the closing of the space station after all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring an alien who will be an American actor called Brad Dourif. He's going to be an alien, and he is going to appear on Earth from his planet, which has been destroyed, and he is going to shout at people about how we're destroying our planet, and the space elements are going to be, I'm going to use that space footage, but it's going to represent British, American Earthlings looking for an alternative venue when they've destroyed their own. And so it went on. And my head was reeling by this. I didn't understand what the film was quite about. So, shaking my head, I said, well, okay, I'll go back to the broadcasters and see what they say. France too were fantastic. It was Yves Janot, who now runs Sunny Side of the Dock, who was at that time commissioner, and he said, well, I don't understand it either, but if Werner wants to do it, that's fine by us, because we want the Werner Herzog film, and it sounds very interesting. So that was okay. The BBC came back and said, this is a disaster, you can't do this. It would be terrible for Werner's career. We can't do this, you can't spend our money on this. And by this stage, I'd already spent half the money, so it was kind of a little bit too late for back out from BBC. I arranged the deviousness of producers. All producers, I think, by definition, are devious. So in a devious presentation, I managed to bring Werner together to meet the commissioning editor at the BBC at a dinner. And as happens when some people meet Werner, there was a kind of a rather sycophantic movement from the commissioning editor, Werner, saying, oh, Mr. Herzog, your films are wonderful. I'm such a fan, and it's such a great pleasure to meet you, and how wonderful. At which Werner turned around to the commissioning editor and said, well, I'm very pleased you think that, because this is a really important film, and so I'm sure you're going to support it. And the commissioning editor, you could visibly see, stopped and thought, what am I going to say next? And he said, well, oh, of course, Mr. Herzog, if that's what you want to do, that's fine.
I come from the outer reaches of Andromeda. Imagine planet Earth, the solar system, the Milky Way, your galaxy. I come from another galaxy, a blue one, way, way beyond your world. Where I come from is the wild blue yonder.
Singer ha sido el productor ejecutivo de cientos de documentales para cine y televisión. Su trabajo incluye la nominada al Oscar Prisoner of Paradise de Malcolm Clarke del 2002, así como la aclamada película The Wild Blue Yonder de Werner Herzog del 2005. Con este director alemán ha trabajado en 12 proyectos, contando la más reciente película llamada Into the Inferno, obra acerca de la relación entre los seres humanos y los volcanes.
Now he has teamed up with Cambridge University volcanologist called Clive Oppenheimer, and they are going to follow the course of a book that Clive has written, which is called Eruptions That Changed the World. It is the process of how mankind from early days to today has lived both alongside volcanoes but been affected by the power and the impact of the volcano. We struggled very hard at one stage to try and do it as an IMAX film, and that was because Werner's keen on trying new ideas. So, for example, when he did Cave of Forbidden Dreams, it was his first attempt at 3D, which he enjoyed. And so he thought he'd move on. Okay, let's try IMAX. But the process of raising the funding for IMAX was so torturous, and we were preempted by the new boys in town, Netflix, who came in and said, look, forget about IMAX. We'll fully fund the budget, make it for us. We accepted the offer, and this will be done for Netflix, but that will be its television outlet, its small screen outlet, once we have shown it in cinemas and festivals, first of all. It's a common phenomenon of the process that broadcasters are sometimes, often, prepared to wait to show it on their screens because they like the idea of the cinema buzz, the festival buzz. It gives them a certain credibility, and it gives it has a chance for a film to create a certain following before it's actually shown.
I had felt that I needed to make some contribution.
And I can remember him saying, make shots as long as possible so there was no possibility of trickery.
Unless the world learns the lesson these pictures teach, night will fall.
I was interviewed for Night Will Fall by a Chinese producer, a Chinese company. And they said, could we do a filmed interview? And I said, well, yeah, no, sure. And they came and they set up in my office and so on. And I said, I didn't know the film was even showing in China. And they said, well, no, it might be shown, but that's not of interest to us. What we're doing is we're making little films about interesting stories and the people who have created interesting stories, which will be about 10 minutes. And we're putting that out, and so people might see the film, but it doesn't matter, because what they'll see is this new little film, if you like, and we'll show some clips of your old film. So I said, okay, that's fine. And then her passing shot was, we show this to 500 million people. And I suddenly thought, 500 million people are watching this, and I think I'm struggling to get 1 million in the UK and so on. It's a different attitude. You have to look at it totally differently.
Buka. Baby udah bagus, akting Baby udah bagus. Cuman jangan lama kali nangis ya.
The purists in filmmaking would, and some have, objected to the act of killing in as far as it was reconstruction that the people were making the film themselves in the film. When I first came on board as an executive producer, I was very taken with it, and it resonated with what I thought Werner would like. And so I introduced the two of them, and Werner saw the film and was blown away by it and thought it was absolutely wonderful. And so he joined the team as an executive producer as well.
Kalau sukses kita bikin ini film, penilaian satu sejarah berbalik. Bukan 180, 360 derajat itu berbalik.
The thing that I really like about not just the storytelling style, which is surreal and gripping, is that Josh, who knew the situation in Indonesia extremely well, he'd lived there for 7 years, he spoke the language, he didn't fall into what a lot of us might have done, which is to play that contextual game with film, that here he's showing something terrible that happened in 1965, and none of us really know about it. And by the end of the film, you still don't really know anything about the government, the Cold War that was surrounding it, what the Americans were doing about it, and so on. And it doesn't matter. I mean, of course, in the long run it matters, but in the film terms, it doesn't matter. You don't have to tell it as a history lesson. You're telling it as a study of human nature.
Aku berbicara di era Orde Baru sama Bapak, apa yang akan Bapak lakukan dengan aku?
Tak bisa kita bayangkan ya.
We all would love to feel that if we're making films that have some kind of social issue behind them, that they make a difference, that they will, in a tiny way, change society or change the world for the better. And I think usually that's an illusion or a dream that we would like to think plays out and doesn't very much. These films actually have made a difference at the moment in Indonesia, which is extraordinary. They were initially, Act of Killing was banned, and now they haven't been able to stop it because of the black market. So The Look of Silence has been showing in cinemas around the country. A couple of months ago, one of the generals in the army who had seen the film decided that it should be shown to his troops, and they should now see the film. And it's the first time since 1965 that there is a sense of facing the past, recognizing the past, acknowledging the past has happened in Indonesia in all that time. So there is a certain, more than a glimmer of hope that something has been changed directly as a result of those two films.
Fall from grace. You'd like to think that everyone's got someone. Disappear with no trace.
I think about her a lot, really. Just holding her, actually. Holding her. Just can't imagine her dying alone.
How did she get us out? A film which couldn't be more different in terms of approach and style, made by Carol Morley, very talented director, who came across a story in the newspapers about a girl who had been found dead in her bedroom, and she'd been there for 3 years without anyone knowing, and so on. So she decided she would find out, she would investigate, and she'd make a film around that, relaying from having worked with so many different kinds of filmmakers. And that is to feel that not one particular style is correct. And I think if anyone typifies it, we go back to Werner Herzog, because you can have, from Werner, you could have films based on archive to complete fantasies. He's done rather surreal and extraordinary anthropological films that have worked in that sort of rather rarefied atmosphere, and I think it's sort of the rather crude parting thing that if it works, and that is where your judgment comes in and where your audiences come, if it works, and that's the right way of telling that particular story. I think persistence. I mean, it sounds a very odd word to throw out. But I think persistence often wins the day. I've noticed over the years, like going to a lot of workshops and a lot of things, that people have a project and you think that's going to be very difficult. They're going to find it very tough to get that through. They'll do the right thing with networking, and then you come back a couple of years later and they're still doing it. The same film, same idea, because you know they have a passion, and eventually they get the thing done. And I found that kind of persistence I very much admire, and think that you have to have that. You can't sort of abandon ship at the first instance. But it's a good time at the moment, is I think my overriding message. People are interested in the documentary. And I think if you're trying to find your way into it, you will do so, and you've now got means of communications that in the past we never had. You can communicate with anyone you want to. You can find ways to meet people, to bump into them, to network, to ask for their money. Jean Rouch used to say, I don't make my films for the audience, I make it for the people I'm filming and for myself.